And so I think we should do our introductions for the recording as well. My name is Eva DeGostini. I am a child psychologist, and I am so pleased to be here today to share yet again another insight into looking at our very young children, our ones from birth to 4 years of age, but also even for some of them that are older, all of them, because what we're going to be presenting today is really about understanding children's development and why certain behaviors are there, why certain ways of reacting are there. This is based on the work of Dr. Gordon Neufeld. And we have with us, of course, Cheryl, who is going to relate the material that we're sharing with you to the cultural values and expectations. But my role, of course, is to together with my colleague Lena, who is here, to present a way of looking at children from a very developmental perspective. Lena.
Thank you, Eva. And I'm Lena Clugston. I live in the state of Maine, but have ties to Canada. And I have worked with young children all of my adult life. I have studied human development and found that the work of Dr. Neufeld really fit with other aspects of my understanding of young children. I was 8 years at Bowdoin College, where we put together a program based on the attachment theories of Dr. Neufeld. And with that, I will share my screen and we will begin the presentation. Okay, is that what we're seeing correct, Eva?
It's beautiful.
Okay, very good. Excuse me just a minute. I have to move a couple things around so that I can actually see. Okay. Good. So this is our seventh of 8 presentations on emotional development of young children. And we will be having a Q&A, which we hope you'll join us for on Tuesday, June 7th at 6:30 p.m. This would be in addition to any questions you may have today, put in the chat, however it works best for you, but we'd love to have you there. We can go into some more depth with the material. Today's session will end somewhere between 4 and 4:30. We will be talking about counterwill. And we're very pleased to have you present for this session. It's an incredibly important instinct that we're discussing called counterwill. We're pleased to have Cheryl with us for our cultural perspective. And Cheryl will be speaking before the break and then at the end before questions and reflections. This is me in my classroom. And as I mentioned, this is where we implemented an attachment-based, play-based program. And also many of the photos that you'll be seeing are from my classroom. And I'd like us to take a moment now just to connect with the cycles of nature. These cycles which are reliable, universal, and shape us all from the inside out. We are now in spring, late spring, luckily. And I'm going to read a little statement by a mentor, an elder mentor of mine, Parker Palmer. The gift of life, which seemed to be withdrawn in winter, has been given once again. And nature, rather than hoarding it, gives it all away. There is another paradox here known in all the wisdom traditions. If you receive a gift, you keep it alive, not by clinging to it, but by passing it along. And of course, the generosity of nature at this time of year brought to mind for me the generosity in what you and I and all of us who work with young children bring daily to those children in our care. and are striving to increase our understanding and the application of our knowledge to our work. So thank you all for being here. Generosity in your time to come to see what this is about. Because counterwill is maybe not anything that you have, a term that you have encountered before. But it is one of nature's most important and I would say also misunderstood gift. Because counterwill actually binds us together and paradoxically can serve to separate us. We're going to take a deep dive into this incredible instinct. So to begin, we will start with a reminder. This is kind of a look back into earlier presentations of what Dr. Neufeld describes as right relationship between children and adults. So in this right relationship, there is an alpha adult and a dependent child, a provider in the adult and a receiver in the child. And we use the word alpha in the context of caring, meaning caring and responsible. The person, the adult who is caring and also responsible for the child. This is not meant to be an authoritarian use of the word alpha. Eva, did you want to add anything into this?
No, I think you've pretty well said it. And the thing about it is that when we are giving the child and the child is able to receive, then we call that right relationship in the sense that now the person who is mature and responsible is the one who is the guide for the child, is the one who is leading the child and gives the child the space that they need to grow and develop. But the adult is the one who is in the lead and doing the provision, and the child is receiving that. And therefore, we have this beautiful situation where we can really guide and work with our children and bring them to their full potential.
Yes, and this is an important point you made, Eva. Thank you. That this relationship is what helps us in guiding children to move forward in their lives and to mature. The important sentence in here also is that the child is able to receive the care, and we'll talk more about all of this as we go on. So we are used to obedient children, a child who follows us easily and imitates us constantly. And if you remember, if you've been in past sessions, we have talked about the roots of attachment. And one of the roots, the second year of life, is devoted to being imitative of the adults around. You can imagine how this imparts culture and language and all sorts of gifts to a child who's trying to make their way in the world and is learning from the adults in this right relationship. So we kind of expect that children are going to follow our lead. However, sometimes this ends, and often it ends. Suddenly the child is no longer receiving our caring, our suggestions. Instead, we have, I'll do it myself. We can have tears and frustration, pushback against our lead.
Yes, and that is often one of the words that we use for that besides resistance is opposition. Right. And so this is what we're going to unpack today is where does that come from? Where does that come from?
Yes. Why would they not accept our comfort, our guidance? Why are they pushing us away? What happened that they're rejecting our care? And most importantly, then, that we ask ourselves the question, for what purpose is this pushback? So we have, thanks to Dr. Neufeld and Otto Rank, a psychologist, we have named an instinct counterwill. And note what counterwill is really about is that it's a defensive reaction to perceived control and coercion, to being told what to do. And it exists in all of us. It is in our nature to not like to be pushed around. Even with small children, maybe especially with small children, the higher the coercion, the greater the counterwill. So as we unpack this in the presentation, we're going to look at some of the research that's been done and tell you some stories of how, giving examples of how this is true. I do think it's important to point out, though, in the beginning, that there are many kinds of coercion. There's physical, there's behavior, there's emotional, right? And in my case, overly happy people in a certain unbalanced way of being happy always drive me to being somber and depressive, because there's this need to balance, this need to push back against something that I might not be feeling so much at the time.
Yeah, and I just want to elaborate on the word instinct, which means that this is something that is wired deep within us. It is not something that is learned. It is something that we are born with and that we come with. And as you'll see today, that it serves a very, very important purpose. And that's why it has to be wired into us.
Right. Instinct, we have no control over the instincts that come with our human brain.
Yeah.
So here we have a nice little cartoon meeting the counterwill instinct in ourselves. Don't tell me what to do. That would be me when somebody says, have a nice day. This doesn't go away in adulthood. We see it emerging in childhood. It doesn't go away in adulthood. However, we do learn how to manage it, because you'll notice in this bubble, the clerk is saying, have a nice day, but the customer isn't saying, don't tell me what to do. She's just thinking it. We don't blurt things out as often, although it may happen, as an untempered child does. And we've talked about untempered children and why that is in their brain development. They don't have a capacity yet for tempering their reaction, for weighing their reaction. And this is a great one. Do not play on or near the pipe or around the pipe. Haha. And look at that.
There they go. And there's been so much research saying the more you tell people not to do something, the more actually they have a desire to do it. It plays out. So it's just an interesting instinct, because it can cause all sorts of troubles. But again, it's there.
It caused trouble for Gordon. Eva, do you want to tell the...
Yes, so our mentor, Dr. Gordon Neufeld, was prided himself when he was a young child of being a good boy, until was this the RCMP story when he was told not to?
No, this was the Boo story.
Oh, maybe you'll need to tell it.
Oh, okay, that's all right. Yeah. He was a young student. I believe he was in second grade at this point, and he did not have an attached relationship with his teacher, who said to the class before. Oh, it is the RMCP. You're right. Who said to the class before the RCMP, sorry, folks, came to speak, the teacher reminded the children not, he said, whatever you do, don't boo. Now, of course, it had never occurred to any of them to boo, but there you go. And of course, Gordon stood up and gave a very loud boo after this man was introduced.
Yes, and he surprised himself. He said when he later on, and when he became a psychologist and now started to study the counterwill instinct, he remembered back to that incident and realized that because this person to whom he was not attached told him what not to do, that he had the impulse to do it. And of course, being in grade two, he didn't quite yet, he wasn't able to keep it in his head. It came out of his mouth. Of course, he got into trouble. But I think it's really important for us to realize that this is something that is within us, and it is something that we all need to contend with. Of course, some of our children have a harder time with that particular instinct for a variety of different reasons.
But I'm sure you can all imagine times when you have been told not to do something and something rises up in you to protest, whether you actually act on that or not.
Yeah, yeah,
So, counterwill and children. As it turns out, as this instinct has been studied, it's found that it has a very important role in childhood, in young children, in two ways. It is really a protective instinct to ensure survival and to ensure growth. And by growth, we mean growth of one's own identity and one's own selfhood. So, what is the reason? And it serves, what is the reason
yeah.
for this? Eva, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Well, I think, and again, as we were preparing this presentation, more and more, we see this little face here. Nobody's happy with that little face. We would much prefer that she be smiling and be willing to do whatever it is we want to tell her to do. But we have to also remember that our little ones are told to do an awful lot of things by an awful lot of people. And as we were really trying to figure out how to explain this to you, it came to my mind that, my goodness, this is something that we really need to honor, that instincts are in us as human beings, not to cause us trouble, but to actually help us to survive and help us to grow. And that we need to honor it, even though it is not in the moment a pleasant thing. But if we can start to see its role, and we're going to be using the word protect a lot, it's a protective instinct. It's there for a reason. Again, not easy for us to understand why all the time. It trips us up because we can't move as quickly as we want to go, but we have to honor its presence in the lives of both our children and even ourselves as well.
And it's our hope that by introducing you, if you will, to this idea of counterwill, this instinct counterwill, that the understanding of it will, in fact, translate into making room for it in a young child. Because this idea that things are there, they're designed by nature, they're there for a reason, has been a theme throughout our presentations. And this is another piece of the developmental picture. And a child's reactions are not particularly in their control. So when we understand both these things, that counterwill exists and they can't temper their reaction. It's very strong in them, but it's the start of learning who they are, and it's the start of figuring out how their place in their village. I was going to mention that. I think I was going to mention it here, Eva, that shyness is a natural and protective part of the instinct, and we're going to talk more about how that fits into the picture of how this instinct protects us. So this is counterwill, protecting, ensuring survival. What do you mean by that, Lena? Eva, what are you talking about?
Well, and again, we know that children need to be attached to adults, and we know that that's an important thing, and we love attachment. I mean, I think it's a very common topic right now in terms of child development. But sometimes what we don't understand is that attachment actually has a complexity with it as well. So its purpose actually is to work with the attachment so that attachment really is able to do its job. And as a result, children need to be very strongly attached to their village of attachment. So the people that are designed to be there with them, to take care of them, and as a result, in order to keep them safe, it also there's another this other instinct. So attachment is one instinct, but there's this other instinct, which basically means is that um, I'm going to focus on the one to whom I'm attached, but I therefore have to actually make sure that I'm not paying attention to the people that I'm not supposed to be attached to. Right. And so
Right.
there's this resistance because we have to keep safe. We have to keep
Yes.
safe. Yeah, from the others. And so our next slide, I think, will, unless you wanted to add something else in here, our
I
next slide
just
will kind of show you a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to call attention to how this instinct is serving attachment by having the child be focused on those they are attached to, who, as Eva has said, are able to care for, who are in the position of caring for them, and in keeping them safe within their cultural context too. But it's interesting how if you are nudged by somebody from behind, your reaction may be to protest that until you turn around and see that it's your best friend who happened to nudge you, and then everything changes. This going between who we're attached to and who we're not attached to is part of counterwill's job to keep us safe. And we call this serving attachment, this resisting of the influence of those not attached to. Eva, you were going to
Yeah.
talk about this.
Yeah, and so Dr. Neufeld very interestingly represents attachment as a magnet, actually, and a magnet has a positive pole and a negative pole, and so we wonder, like, well, it doesn't make does it make sense for there to be this kind of pushing away? Well, yes, it does, because again, we have to remember instincts are wired into us as human beings from a long, 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 long time ago, um, and um, and they stay there and continue to serve that purpose. But in earlier times, I actually lived for quite a long time in Saskatchewan, and it's a very large province, and it has a very clear northern part which is full of the woods, and a southern part which is the prairies. And so, if we want to understand why not only do children need to be strongly attached to their people of their village, to their people, but why they have to resist those that are not their people, is just imagine. And again, I'm not an expert in this area at all, but again, I can use my imagination. Imagine the people from the woods coming together with the people from the prairies, and they often did that in the summertime. There were large gatherings. The children had to the families had to make sure that the children continued to look to them for certain habits, certain ways of doing things, certain cultural practices, because those were the practices that were best suited for living in the woods or best suited for living on the prairies. And so there had to be a mechanism by which children were protected from getting influenced too quickly by those who didn't understand what they were living. And sort of the conclusion we came to was that this is an instinct that protects a child, but even protects us as adults from trusting too quickly, from trusting people that don't have necessarily our best interest in mind. So it isn't just about impelling us or moving us towards the people that are in our attachment village, but also actively pushing away. And again, you look at a little 3-year-old. If a little 3-year-old drops a Kleenex and a stranger goes up to them and says, "You pick up that Kleenex," many 3-year-olds will turn around, put their hands on their hips and says, "You can't tell me what to do. You're not my mummy." And that's exactly that resistance. Now, we get confused by that because we think they should listen to adults, but actually it's honoring this sense of you, I'm not attached to you yet. I'm not able to listen to you. And so it's there for a really, really good reason.
Right, yes. And the other way we see it is in greeting people to whom they do not know. And I can remember when I first started working with a parent-child class, I just knew this instinctively, and it's been borne out by counterwill. When the children came in with their parents, I would greet the parents, not the child. My eyes would go to the child, and I encouraged the parents. I told them, your child doesn't need to greet me unless they want to, unless they're openly do it. You don't need to urge them to, because they're not ready. They don't know me yet. And it was true. Many people felt great relief at that because their child hid, and they were always thinking their child should come forward with a greeting to a complete stranger. But it's not in children's nature to do that. With time, it was all solved as they got to know me. But in the meantime, if I greeted the parent, they learned a greeting ritual. And when they were ready, they would start to apply it.
Yeah. And so that's what we call shyness, or in very little babies, we call that stranger protest, which usually comes about around 7-8 months when they start. It's harder for them to be picked up by other people. They want to cling to their mother or cling to their father. And again, now that we understand that this is a protective mechanism until they know, and until they're given permission by their caregiver to include that other person. And one way of thinking of this is that when you and the parent were talking together, Lena, the child saw, oh, my mummy and Ms. Lena, now, oh, there's attachment happening. And now you got brought from the one side of the magnet over to the other side. So you are now included in the village. And we know that bit by bit, as you said, when they more and more they go, okay, my parent trusts her, my parent trusts her. Now the shyness went away because attachment was there. But it, again, for me, now that I understand this, I so appreciate a child who is still able to feel that shyness. It's a natural protective instinct. And I honor that, and I want to honor that. And I'm happy to see it because I think it's a sign that the child is very much in touch with their emotions, in touch with their feelings, in touch with their instincts.
Yes. And it's interesting in the childcare world, what you can see many different manifestations of this. At the start of the day, at drop off, often a child is reluctant to go to the caregiver, especially in infancy. And at the end of the day, a child can be very reluctant to go to their parent. Mm-hmm. Because during the day, the child has shifted their who is taking care of me attachment instinct to the caregiver, and then the parent comes and they have to shift back. So, and it's a slow process. It's not in every child, but it can be a slow process, this back and forth and going from being positively attached to one person to then moving back to the positive attachment with the parent. I don't know if any of you have seen this. I've seen it several times in my career where a child was reluctant at the end of the day. It didn't last long, but
no, because the attachment is there, so it does warm up. But it's kind of like priming it, warming it up. And the best way of doing that is by the adults being warm with each other. So now the child's eyes are naturally brought towards two adults who are warm with each other, right? And then the shift happens quite naturally.
Yes, so we would always have, we're calling that matchmaking. You can see that word on this slide, which is about how counterwill protects the child from strangers, from people that they're not attached to, and how to welcome that. When there is no existing relationship, we rely heavily on matchmaking, which we've been describing in some detail about the adults being friendly with each other. This gives a child confidence that they can attach to the person that they do not know. And also that it's important to note that it takes a long time to build a relationship with a young child. It takes time. It's not instantaneous. They are in the counterwill and attachment magnet, or they're in the attachment magnet where they're only attaching to one person at a time. And to make the shift takes some time and comes with certain requirements that the other person is accepted by their parents and so on and so forth. is part of this person is part of my village. It takes time. But the more we can match make with the parent at drop off, pick up, at an orientation before school begins, the more a child can see that the parent trusts us, the more easily they begin to trust us. Take your times. And I wanted to add here, even, and then I'll be quiet and let you talk.
No, that's fine.
I wanted to add here that children don't eat for people they're not attached to.
Mhm.
Most children. We never should say every child. But sometimes when I had infants in my care, it would take 3 days before they would take a bottle from a caregiver. And I don't know that the relationship was built up firmly, but it was starting at least, and also hunger. So after a while, they would begin to take food from me.
Yeah, but you notice that hesitancy to kind of let themselves go so that they could then feel their hunger and feel their need to eat took a while. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. This is a slow process. Beware the instant attachment. We're going to talk more about that
Yeah.
later.
What
Yeah.
I wanted to say was that sometimes as well, other caregivers will come into the room, right, for a variety of different reasons. Someone has to leave, someone is on a part-time schedule, someone comes over the lunch hour. It's again very important that the adults that we again do that matchmaking, bring that adult into the world, and we so how should I put it? We sometimes get a little bit so busy that we forget the little acts that can make a huge difference. Because if the child is looking at you, and you then Miss Mary comes into the room, and you say, "Oh, hello, Miss Mary. I'm so happy to see you today," and you give the child a little moment to realize, "Oh, Miss Mary is now part of our attachment world." It's all about this, just a way and again, I think that's why the magnet is helpful, because what we're doing is we're bringing Miss Mary from this side of the magnet over to that side of the magnet. But that's an adult. That's the adults that have to do that first. Then Miss Mary can talk to the children. Unless, of course, there's an established relationship. It's different if there is one. But if there's hesitancy, it's always through the primary attachment that it'll work best.
And this is an important moment for me to also make a pitch for what we call primary caregiving. So even if a child is going to be under the care of several people in a room, which is always the case, that's just the way it is, that there be one designated primary caregiver for each child with whom they can build that special relationship. And we'll talk more about that in our session 8, and I've talked about it in the past, but I cannot emphasize more that this is a very important aspect of classroom, how a classroom can be managed in a way that maximizes the attachment instincts of the child and minimizes their resistance to our care. Counter will protecting us, and how to avoid counter will erupting within existing relationships. So we talked a little bit about when a child doesn't know us at all, but now we have a relationship with this child, and we are part of the village of attachment. And yet, almost daily, I would say absolutely daily, it is important to reactivate that attachment instinct in the child towards us, so that they are constantly aware that we are the ones taking care of them, that we are worthy of their trust, that we are paying attention to them. They know that. So how does one do this? Greeting every day when they arrive warmly, and at the end of the day also making a bridge to the next day. I'm so looking forward to having lunch with you tomorrow. I will be looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. I wonder what kind of flower you're bringing in for our bouquet for our table tomorrow, just to keep this alive, so that we are paying attention to them and they are paying attention to us. I often asked parents when they drop their child off to be sure to orient their child to the primary caregiver. If there is one, or who the lead teacher would be for any particular day, who would have a particular interest in their child, rather than to the other children who might be present. Keep the focus on the adult, keep that right relationship active. And that's everybody, all the adults' job is to keep that active.
Yeah, so to notice, oh, Miss Mary's here, and bring the eyes to the adult, bring the eyes to the adult. Yeah, and then the adult, of course, remembering as well. And again, the interesting thing is that when we are relaxed and when everything is going well, we do that spontaneously. I mean, you are taking care of children in a childcare center because you love children. I'm sure your eyes light up. Where it sometimes gets a bit tricky is that when we get preoccupied and busy, we sometimes forget, and Dr. Neufeld calls these our attachment manners. And I've even heard, I tend to work with slightly older children, but I've heard teachers have said to me where the children will say, Miss, you forgot to say hello. And it's not because the teacher didn't want to, but the children notice that. So really, the busier we get, actually, the more we need to slow ourselves down and say, I have to make sure to say hello, to do the greeting, to greet the parent and then to greet the child, to have that warmth in my eyes, no matter how distracted I am, because that is what's going to bring them into this right relationship with us, and will keep the counter will down. Because when the basically the attachment instincts are say, oh, this person is taking care of me, there is less counter will in that moment.
Yes, indeed. That is the goal. So, counterwill protects. How to welcome counterwill. These are the words we're using over and over again: welcoming it, becoming hospitable to this idea of counterwill. In an existing relationship, when a child is not engaged with the adult at that moment, how we could, if we interrupt what they're doing or ask them to move to a different activity, we could encounter resistance. So, what do we do? When you have a relationship with a child, you must still re-engage. This is a all day long event. You must the re-engaging of the attachment instinct so that the counter will is reduced, rather than before issuing orders. So in this particular picture, we are done with laundry folding, but it is a delightful activity with the child and she truly enjoys it. But it is now time to put everything away and to move on to another activity. So I get her eyes and we smile, and you can't see a nod, but you could have a nod in there too. And we call this collecting the child. We've collected their attention. We've brought it back to us so that their instinct is, oh, this is a person that is taking care of me. This is a person I like. This is a person I'm engaged with. I'm going to do what they say, which is the instinct, part of the instinct. And so before moving on to the next activity, I just was sure to engage her to engage her, period, end of sentence, so that she was engaged with me and ready to go to the next activity. So the adult task is to be constantly engaging this attachment instinct all during the day, in the greeting rituals to start the connection, and all during the day before moving a child into different tasks. In this case, I probably sang, because that is one of the easiest ways to make transitions for groups of children or even for one child. And I probably sang, all done, and folded the last bib, and we were all done before moving on to a different task. And that instantly gets their child's attention.
Yeah. And again, the
before you direct.
Collect before you direct. And collecting means that the adult's eyes need to be warm. There needs to be a smile. And that's why music is so lovely, because it's a very gentle way of communicating something. And our face looks different when we're singing. And so when the children look at us to see us singing already, and then all we have to do is sing back to them and they get a little nod, and then away we can go.
There we can go.
Yep. It takes a little bit of time, but I think it's worth the effort.
Well, I'll tell you, in the end, Eva, And I'm sure everybody can relate to this who's working in a classroom. In the end, doing things that are renewing for the child actually work to renew the adult. And this kind of engagement is much less exhausting than issuing orders all during the day, which is how many of us begin our practice. Time to this, time to that. There's a beauty and a graciousness in making it a little bit more connected to the child. And of course, I'm a big fan of doing that through music. There's many, many ways to do it. And you can see an example in this picture of one of them. And this is a place where we can kind of trip because sometimes we just think, I'm an adult, I'm the teacher, I'm the parent, I'm the step parent, I'm the foster parent. The child should automatically defer to my instruction, my guidance. As it turns out, children don't see it that way. The role alone is not enough. We might be in this role of authority, but it takes relationship to avoid resistance. It takes engaged relationship, an attached relationship.
Yeah. And that's why, again, substitute, it's so much harder when there's a substitute teacher or a substitute care worker. The other thing that I often alert people to as well is how many different people are caring for this child through the course of a day. They might have the ones in the center, but it might be that a child who has just been put into foster care, now they have a whole new set of people that are taking care of them afterwards. So we have to be aware of the fact that it isn't just that you want to take care of the child, it's how the child perceives that. And when there are too many adults involved that they don't really know, no matter what your role is, no matter how good your intentions are, it's not enough for that child. They have to feel safe with the people that are caring for them to keep this counter-will instinct down. Because remember, it's the instinct that protects us from trusting too quickly.
Mm-hmm. We can't say that enough. And yet it also is something that we trip over because it does take time to build a relationship. I had a baby come to me who had been all summer long with his dad on the deck. His dad was a teacher, and so he had the summer off, and they had this lovely life with two older siblings, very, very safe for this baby. Then he came to a center. And he was a bit older, so he was past the age of, he was probably 9 months, past the age of just accepting strangers, well past it. And I had just taken my first course with Dr. Neufeld, and something came into my mind that was said in that course, which was never let a child feel they are too much for you to handle. Now, that's what popped into my head. I had very little in my head at this point to help me in this situation, but that came to me. And so I held on to him for 3 days. He cried, but I didn't let him go for very long. And my colleagues were irritated. They said, "Oh, just pass him around. Somebody will this," and that didn't seem to work. Had I even tried it, and I think I tried it for a couple hours or something. But in the end, he stopped crying. He turned to me with clear eyes. He began to make music. He was starting to sing on the diaper table, and I would tone with him. And it was over. He had accepted me. Yeah. And it was a long, arduous. I use that example frequently because that is the internal difficulty of a child in making into an attachment to a stranger. Yeah. That was how long it took, and there was that amount of upset.
Yeah. Yes, and sadly enough, and again, I've run into this a couple of different times, people will say things about a child like that. Oh, he's just being stubborn. He's just being stubborn. Not he is listening to his instincts, which are saying, I don't know if I can trust you yet. And so, of course, some children feel it more intensely than other children. Some children seem to make the passage more easily. We have to also always remember that children bring their own wiring to us. So, in other words, some children are a lot of things bother them, a lot of things affect them. Other children seem to be just kind of more robust. So, for one child, it might have been a couple of hours or a half an hour of crying with you for them to all of a sudden be reassured. But we never know what the child is bringing to us. And so we have to honor and respect the basic message they're giving is I'm not ready, I'm not comfortable with you yet.
Yes, and a point I wanted to make is it didn't matter that my heart was full. My heart was full of love for this child and compassion and concern. It didn't translate to him. It took my endurance and my acceptance of his distress
Yeah.
to make him feel safe. So here we have the baby saying, no, I don't think so.
Yeah. So So now we're going to move to a another reason for why counter will is there. One that maybe is one that will be that most of you already recognize and honor and know about because of course you are again you've chosen to be caregivers to the very youngest of children because you want to create an environment in which they can grow and develop. And so that natural force within us that moves us to grow and develop, we call that emergence. And emerge, come forth, venture forth. And so that it's a very strong force within us. It's another one of these things that's wired into us. We don't usually talk about it, but it's on the level of emotion because emotions move us. And of course, you all know that you have all the little ones that when they're ready to stand, all of a sudden they stand up, even though they fall down. When they're ready to walk, when they start to speak, and ultimately, this is the force that moves us to develop a sense of who we are in the world. I'll let you take it from here, Lena.
Oh, I'm just looking at that little one through the triangle who's just starting to stand up, and then how far the others have come in terms of their gross motor skills. But what it took, you can kind of see it in the face of that little one who's just beginning to walk. That reminds us of where it comes from, the courage that it takes and the strength that it takes to actually get up and do something. I have a grandson, and my daughter was pulling her hair out this winter. He was 7, 8, 9 months old, and he wasn't yet. He wanted to emerge, but he couldn't figure out how, and he wasn't happy on his back. He wasn't happy moving. He couldn't get to things, and she spent a few months of really hard work to make sure that he was supported in his frustration. And then suddenly, his emergence was given expression. He was strong enough now to roll over and this and that and the other thing and crawl, and everything changed. And this force, it wants to come out, and it does. They get up and they move. But there can be, I'm just using him, my grandson, as an example of how sometimes it can get a little bit stuck.
Yeah. Well, it can be bigger than what the child's body is quite ready to
Ready
do.
for. Thank you for that, Eva.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
exactly.
it's a big
Yeah.
movement. It's a big force. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So here we have how counterwill ensures that this emergent growth can happen, because its purpose is to protect this emerging self, to make room for one's own will. And I chose this picture because of this little girl balancing on this plank, and her arms are out, and she's so focused, you can almost feel her abdominal muscles engaging and so on. And this is all coming from the inside, this tremendous urge to conquer something, to be who she is, carefully balancing. And they cannot, because if you recall from our conversations and other sessions about brain development, there's only one thought or emotion at a time in a child. And this is not an abnormality. This is normal because of the frontal lobe development. So they cannot integrate their will and an adult's will at the same time. So this is the way counter will protects this emergent force by pushing away the will of anyone, adult, child, of anyone.
Yeah. And this is the time of life where they start saying, I'll do it myself. And then you watch them try and do it and they just can't very well. But that and this is the counter will basically says, leave me alone until I figure it out. And again, a caring adult is going to figure out a way around it, but not be put off by the fact. Another example that comes to my mind, and again, it might be an odd one, but I remember raising my own children. Sometimes my son would be like very contradictory, right? Oppositional a little bit. And I remember one day he said, it was at daytime, and he says, Mommy, it's nighttime. And you look outside, the sun is shining. Like, where is he getting that from? And so you might want to explain to him what's going on. And but his counterwell said, No, Mommy, it's not daytime. It's nighttime. Of course, being a psychologist, I kind of went along with it, and let it be. But I'm wondering, why is he thinking it's nighttime? And then I went outside, and as you know, there are some days in which the moon is huge, even when the sun is there. And of course, what he was doing is he was noticing the moon. The moon meant it was nighttime. And now it's going to take a while before he will eventually come figure out that it can be daytime with a moon in it. But he had such a desire to make up his own mind about what was daytime, what was nighttime. And we have to let that process happen and unfold without too many explanations.
Yes, and this brings to mind a story that I have, Eva, that's somewhat similar, about giving space to the child's reality rather than correcting them or telling them that they're wrong. I was caring for a child, and we were walking in the forest, and she said, the trees are stuck in the ground. Now, my adult instinct might be to correct that impression, to teach, to talk about root systems and so on. But I didn't. I said, the trees are stuck in the ground. I repeated back to her what she said. She said, yes, the trees are stuck in the ground. I said, oh, the trees are stuck in the ground. And I honored her reality. Because I also knew, I could see why she would say that, right? Just like Eva with the moon shadow. You can see after a point why a child might say that. And I also knew that she and I were going to be gardening together, and she was going to see roots, and we were going to plant things with roots, and she was going to get this idea. It wasn't going to be long or hard until she knew about trees and their roots. In the meantime, by not correcting her and honoring her world, I wasn't sort of giving her this idea that she didn't know anything or that she was ignorant in some way. And also, I knew she had a big brother who corrected her all the time. So this seems like an important thing to me to do, to just go with the reality that the child was presenting, even though it was wrong. It was their lack of experience and context from the perspective of the child. It was absolutely true.
And tempting to kind of get into this verbal back and forth with them, and our idea here is that when we realize that their insistence on being right, especially at this age, is a stepping stone to figuring out a bigger world. And they only do have one thought at a time. So it's we really need to honor that instinct to say, I have to see it my way. And Dr. Neufeld sort of puts counterwill as kind of a little fence that basically says, as I'm building my ideas, I can't be confused with your ideas yet.
Yet.
Yeah. Except when it's really important, obviously, we're not going to let them hurt themselves. But
Yeah.
much of the time, just let it be, let it be. Let that odd view of the world exist, because bit by bit, and he shows this little tiny emergent self kind of coming up, and this little counterwill fence protecting it so that it can grow and develop. It's a beautiful thing when you start understanding it. Counterwill becomes quite beautiful.
And the answer, when children ask me questions along the same theme, I would often just repeat the question back to them and wait for their answer. And their answer was sometimes so amazingly brilliant and revealed to me what their inner world was and how much context and experience they had or didn't have. But I learned to, again, just repeat things back and wait, and knowing that they were going to get all the learning they needed.
Yeah. Well, and I think with my son, I couldn't agree with him that it was nighttime, because that would not make any sense. But as you say, if I had been able to just repeat it back to him, oh, it's nighttime, he would probably have said, yes, mommy, look at the moon.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Oh, wow. You're right.
And then you would
Comes
have
out at
known.
night. The moon
Yeah.
comes out at night. That's all. I'm not going to tell him it's daytime. The moon comes out at night. He's going to figure it out eventually. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it actually makes life very interesting. And the child is very happy because they get to kind of then elaborate and spin, and eventually they get to the same place we are.
Yep.
Again, we're talking about how this counterwill force is protecting emergence. So here we have a child who doesn't want to join the circle. And rather than insisting or something, usually what I would do is adjust the circle to him, and remember that they're pushing our will out of their way so that they can discover their own wills, and they are filled with oppositionality. But then when there is connection and respect for what it is that they need, the venturing forth it does occur, and they're back into relationship with us. But let me see. What would I do? I would state what's happening. Oh, Griffin doesn't want to be in circle today. And then we might move around him. There was one little boy who didn't want to be in circle, and I gave him a role. So he got to hit the little gong that announced it was circle time. And then he was perfectly happy to come because I had helped him feel a part of things as an individual, not lost in a group identity. And this is really important right now in this stage of their lives, that they could so easily get lost in other people's identities, and their own will is starting to come out. And so they don't want to get lost in other people's identities, be it a group or an adult's idea or whatever. And so it's an honoring of that and bringing them into the process with, you can sound the gong that signals circle time. So on, coming alongside their effort, you're trying very hard to do this, or you really don't want to do this right now, and you may sit over here, whatever it is, to come alongside and show sympathy for what their resistance might be. And then continuing on, the one-on-one moments, noticing. noticing what they're looking at. This begins in infancy on the diapering table, where you notice, oh, you're looking at this, or oh, yes, you're lifting your leg up, you're putting your hand in your mouth. Just noticing and telling them begins in infancy. It creates a respect for who they are, and that they have an identity of their own, and it will foster their sense of self. And it's part of also increasing a child's sense of their significance when an adult notices them. It's hard to do, but we have these times of bodily care. And that is a perfect opportunity to be one-on-one with a child and to speak to them about what they're noticing, what their ideas are, letting them try things out, and so on. There's a sentence on here about sharing stories about who they are. When you're not with them, you may notice, or somebody may tell you something that happened on the play yard, and you can repeat that back to them. I heard this about you, and so on, so that they get a sense that you are noticing, that you're engaged with them, and you know who they are. So the whole theme here is that they're trying to figure out who they are, and we can help that by reflecting back to them who we see them as. And as this happens and they discover themselves, resistance decreases.
Yes, and I think people often say some of the prime time for resistance is around 2 years old and going into 3 years old, when of course they are capable of doing more for themselves and managing their world a lot more. And so we see this again as a beautiful sign of growth and development. It can seem negative because they're constantly kind of pushing us away or wanting to do things differently or wanting to do it their own way, but it is really a sign that that impulse to be themselves is there. Of course, we have to work with it as well.
Yes, and this little child wanted to put on his own tuffo suit. Obviously not capable, but giving him support, letting him do what he can. Notice how he's clinging to my arm there, without letting him just do it by himself and giving up, throwing up my hands and saying, well, all right, you do it, knowing that he wasn't going to be able to. So coming alongside again, letting them have a role and do what they can do, but also support.
Yeah. So we need to still be the guides. We need to give as much space as we possibly can, but ultimately we are the containers for that space. So that, and of course that happens naturally because there are so many times of the day when there are things the adults have to say, well, this is time for this or this is time for that. But within that, we give as much space as possible. So it's the dance. It's always the dance of the person who is the guide, who is the leader, of stepping back into that leading role, but sometimes stepping back as well and giving the space. So it's a back and a forth, but ultimately the adults need to be the ones who make the final decisions and right. Are going to be the carers. Yeah.
Yeah. We're now at our pause moment where we make room for Cheryl to share ideas that she's had about how this relates to her experience and her cultural experience.
Hi.
Should I stop sharing here, Eva? Remind me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, like listening to both of you, for me in my language, what came forward was Kwayak Awendewin, which means the proper close relationship, as in it takes a community to raise a child. And I really like what you said, we need to honor those innate emotions that's within the child in their lives, in their little lives, and that shyness is a protective factor. But I also kind of, thought about shyness being, something, like you said, it's an instinct that are hardwired into us from a long time ago, and also from the experiences that our parents have had. And sometimes when in big families like such as my own, I'm from a family of 7 children. and I'm the baby. So, my mother having all these children, you're raised by your older siblings. And it can be quite fun sometimes.
But not always, right?
But not always. Because they're reminded of the rules after. And, instincts protect us from trusting too quickly. And I think we had that conversation before, when a child has trust too quickly, the concerns that could come up there. And when I think about what you said about to activate and reactivate the attachment all day long, like I really, really like that. To have one primary caregiver, because I remember when I worked in early childhood, we had one primary caregiver, and she was like the welcoming woman, Any child that was really, really upset, she could calm them down. But then eventually passed it on to the head person in the room that's going to be there with the child all day themselves. So there was a kind of a transfer there. And that we must keep our attachment manners, It has to be routine for children. Every day, they come in and we smile at them and we say, "How are you?" and how was your day? Or, just to keep the same old comfortable, questions, and to make sure that we're actively listening. Because, I could ask you, "Oh, how was your day?" And I'm looking over here and over there.
Yeah.
So this is not very helpful. And to consider, and especially like I work with social service children, like how many people have they been, in contact with who've been caring for them? And this is something that we really, really, got to consider when we look at a child as they come in every day. Like, what kind of day have you had, and who has been taking care of you?
Yeah.
How many people? And the last thing I wanted to say, and I was wondering, you're going to hit all the nails on the head, because there's, three things that I thought about, when a child is having a hard time, like a difficult day, we always think about, water and outdoors. Mm-hmm. These are two soothing things and then I also added music, because music for me is something that really calms me down. And when we play soft music for children within the center, it changes their feelings. Yeah. And then I thought about, it's harder, I would say, to go outside when it's 40, like let's say 20 below outside in the winter, as opposed to a nice day in the summer. So, these are some challenging things that we've had in the past, but, there's the gross motor room, if people have that, to get that energy out of the child. Yeah. Because sometimes they don't want to talk. No. They need to expel energy or expend energy to get them back to thinking, on the right track.
Yeah.
So, yes, ladies.
We will talk a little more in the second half about some of the challenging situations that people might find themselves in and how to manage those. So we will add that to it. But again, you're absolutely right. Outdoors and quiet music makes such a difference to the whole way a child feels, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks again.
Great. So I think we can take a 15-minute break at this point and come back at 3 o'clock. If that would. Oh,
that's 20 minutes. That's 20 minutes, Eva.
Yeah, I think we didn't have any questions, so I think we'll just continue. Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. We're moving on in our presentation on counterwill. to another topic that may seem counterintuitive. The risks of praising. So remember, we're talking about this emergent force and how counterwill protects the will of the child from accepting direction, guidance, ideas, anything really from an adult when they're fully in their sense of their own emergence in their own world, which isn't all the time, but which is certainly comes up for them. And this is something that is, again, as I say, somewhat counterintuitive. But the effects of praising a child are different than we might expect. We want to be supportive of children. Absolutely. It's important to figure out the language to use to get there without converting their sense of why they're doing something from being motivated from the inside to doing it for the adults and for the praise, doing it for others. And sometimes this becomes then a force of habit, and children grow to become a performer rather than motivated from the inside out. And sometimes it's an inner shift that creates a loss of interest in the activity. Eva, do you want to tell the story of the research project?
Yeah, so actually there's been, I want to say quite a bit of research, but there has been some research trying to understand, and they come at it from a number of different perspectives, but they want to look at the phenomenon. Because we've been told that for the longest time that if we want children to do something, we need to praise it so that it will continue to happen. That's a very behavioristic way of looking at things. And it is not a developmental way of looking at things, because a developmentalist understands that children do things because they want to, right? Because it comes from them. And so for a variety of different reasons, researchers have kind of taken an interest in this and said, okay, well, let's see what happens. One of the simplest pieces of research that they looked at was around the use of markers. And so they set up a situation, and in research, you always have a group of children or some children that you do something with them, and other children you kind of let nature take its course. So in this particular case, they had young children, probably around 3-4 years old, in a playroom. And in that playroom were markers and paper. And we all know our little ones love markers and paper, and they want to color. And so what the researchers did was, for some of the children, they just allowed them to choose whatever they wanted to play with and did not make any kind of a comment. For another group of children, they, when the children started to play with the markers, they very actively praised them. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Oh, that's so good. And they might even have given them a little sticker that basically said, oh, we're just so happy that you're using the markers. We really want you. And again, I mean, just think of it, when they do use the markers, they're practicing their fine motor skills. So, we want them to keep using the markers. And as good research does, they then check to see what the fallout is, or what's going to happen from it. So a little while later, they put both groups of the children back into the room with many, many different kinds of toys and things that the children could play with, including the markers. And what they found, there was a significant difference. The children who had been praised completely avoided using the markers, whereas the children for whom it hadn't been noted one way or another continued to play with them at the same level that they had played with before. So we think it's not just that the praise, that they were waiting to be praised to play with the markers again. It was like they didn't feel like playing with them again. Because what praise does is says, this is my agenda as the adult. It's no longer their agenda. Hopefully they moved on to something else they were interested in, but they lost interest in something that's naturally interesting to children.
Mm-hmm. And I have a very similar artistic moment to describe, which was when I was busily learning how to draw and paint with a teacher. And this was fairly early on in my marriage. And my husband bought me an easel for my birthday. And I stopped painting at that point. It was like it was too much. It was too much pressure. It was coming from the outside. I hadn't asked for it. I wasn't ready for it. And so I lost interest. And this is such an interesting phenomena, but I think it's very, very widespread. And once we mature, which obviously I hadn't around painting, we know our own minds. This need to have our counter will come up lessons, right? But it's very fragile in the beginning of an activity or in the beginning for children. And once they are rewarded, they are aware of our will, as Eva said. They suddenly become aware of our will, somebody's will on the outside. And that will be enough to dampen their own will in wanting to do it.
Yeah. And as you say, there are some children that will then become performers. So they will constantly looking to see, are you praising me? Am I good enough? Am I doing the right thing? And for a while we see that as not a bad thing. And then all of a sudden we start realizing, oh my goodness, they're only ever doing things because someone's noticing. It's not coming from inside of themselves. And so it's not that we don't appreciate children, that we don't delight in them, but really, if from a developmental perspective, we're basically saying children are wired to grow and develop. It comes from them, and all we have to do is be there. If a child shows us their picture, we can delight in it. Oh, thank you for showing me your picture. That might be all you need to say to them. Thank you for showing it to me. You're proud of it. Or you might want to, mention something about the blue that they're using, just some little thing that you're mentioning that doesn't take away from what came from inside of them, but does know that you're appreciating. We do, unfortunately, and as I say, it's hard for us to say. I know, Lena, you feel the same way. We've been telling you so many things you need to do differently. Now the one thing you thought you had right, now we're saying it again. But it is because emergence, how should I put it? It's a precious, precious thing. We want children to do things because they want to do them. And so we had to bring this up.
Yes. And I love what you said, Eva, about it's not that we're not praising in our hearts. It's that our language becomes different. So we're not making it about them aware of this as a reward, but that they're doing things for their own reasons. So finding these neutral things to say, you worked hard on that. What beautiful colors. Just neutral statements of fact, rather than some of the good job or something that is more direct about their achievement. Just to enter into their process a little bit is the way in. So it's not to not praise, but just to do it in a different way, so that it's not becoming a reward for doing something, because the children are really, really brazen in counter will at this age. It's wonderful. It's untempered. It's like it should be cheered for. We want this to be emerging in children. We want this. It's learning how to work with it so that it doesn't become a problem and oppositional. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, again, some people have they say, but I've been praising him and now he doesn't want to do it anymore. And, you're doing the praise for all the right reasons because you want to encourage the child, but realizing, oops, and I think you said it beautifully about yourself. It was too fast. It was too much. There was too much of an expectation. So I used to do many, many, many years ago, I used to talk about the difference between appreciative praise, right? Mm-hmm. Appreciative praise and rewarding kind of praise. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was just something we felt we had to, because counter will does turn up in that particular situation
turn
as
up.
well. Yeah.
Absolutely does. And it can stifle a child, maybe not in the long run, but certainly I'm sure those children picked up markers again.
Eventually.
Eventually. So the idea here being enter into the process with the child, just as we did, do the noticing thing, noticing. You worked hard on that. You were very careful with your brush. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Now, so there's a little part of all of us when we are engaged in raising young children, the little thought that occurs to us in the back of our mind, which is, please just give me a couple of hours when you don't say no to me. Couldn't you just be obedient for an entire day? Or a couple of weeks or whatever. And so there's a little part of us that would say life would just be so much easier if you just let me tell you what to do and you just did it. The trouble is that that is not a healthy place for a child to be. And really, when we consider about counter will and how important it is in establishing who you are and your needs and your will, and protecting you, when all this word protect, counter will protects, when we become too focused on trying to make a child trying to make a child obey, then actually we can end up with a really much bigger problem. And I often say to people, do we want our children to say yes to everything? Do we want our children to say yes all the time? And most people will realize, I don't. The interesting thing is that sometimes when we have had to or have been too harsh with children, their counter will can go underground. I had one little girl that I knew. She came into kindergarten from a very, very difficult situation, and was brought into a lovely, caring foster home and a lovely, caring kindergarten. But she just, everything that she did, she was too scared to do anything else. Like, she literally had no will of her own. She just kind of wanted to please everybody and to just be a good little girl. And as she started to allow the caring to come in, she started to find a little will of her own. And she did start to say no. And because I understood about this, the importance of the ability to say no and to create a little space for yourself and to be able to resist people that are doing things that are hurting you, I told the staff to rejoice every time she said no, because this little girl was finally starting to take her place. It had just been so suppressed. We also sometimes see children where people have been very harsh with them and insisted that they obey all the time, is that all of a sudden they start attaching too easily to strangers. Cheryl mentioned that. Well, what do you do with a child who's just running with strangers all the time? The counter will instinct was supposed to be there to protect them, but when your attachment world hasn't really been the kind of attachment world that you need, your attachment brain is going to say, attach to anybody. But the trouble is that it stays very superficial and it causes problems later on. And so for me, when I see a child who too quickly attaches, well, to myself, because often as a psychologist, I would walk into a place and nobody would know me. And if no adult had said hello to me, and a child came too quickly and sat in my lap. And I remember one little girl sitting in my lap and playing with my necklace and telling me how lovely my necklace was. If I didn't realize that, oh, where's her counter will instinct? Where's her protective mechanism for this stranger? I went to the staff and I said, please tell me her story. And of course, again, she had a very, very sad story.
Yes. Yeah. This appeals, of course, to our adult ego when a child sits on our laps and compliments things and seems like they're right there with us. But it is really indeed a red flag that something is missing. Something is missing. And Eva, I don't know if you touched on, I don't think you did, on obedience out of fear, which is also a way that counterwill can go underground if a child. Well, I guess that was true in the story that you told. That little girl, her obedience was out of fear.
Totally.
You would say, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly enough, many of our children will continue to show strong counterwill under those circumstances. And those are the children that get the diagnosis. I've always felt, and I mentioned this when we talked about frustration and about the children who have tantrums and explode, I would rather have a child be continually oppositional, because it says to me, he's just trying to communicate. There's something not working in my world, than a child who is so cowed and so alarmed that now they don't even dare speak up for themselves. And, with this little girl, what was my worries for her? She turns 12, 13 years old, and she's going to obey anyone. And we know there are people out there who will take advantage of a child like that. I want children to say no. And then it's our job to try and figure out what's going wrong, what's not working right. What is upsetting you? Because if you don't say no, we don't even know that.
Yeah. And we also have the obedience that comes with consequences or so on. But the thing is that this often isn't happening on the inside then, that they're actually making a turn towards relationship and compliance out of attachment. But it's a superficial kind of compliance. So there's so many different ways to look at this. But I love that Dr. Neufeld charges us with always looking for what's missing. And when you see things like frustration and eruptions missing, and things like protest and saying no missing, and initiating play. If there's a little girl, I'm working with a faculty with this little girl who will play with other children, but never initiates play of their own. And it's in that solitary play that much more of the emergent inside, what's inside that child, the dream world, if you will, almost of a child, emerges. It's in their solitary play. We call it emergent play, in fact. It's quite different than play with others, although there can be overlaps.
Yeah.
But this is a child who's not developing a will of their own or a sense of self. And then you've got a tragedy.
Yeah. And I know this reminds me of another story that I had with, again, this was slightly older children who were in a class for children with severe behavior disorders, and wanted to encourage the staff to give them time to play on their own. But this was a couple of little boys could not play on their own. And we often say, well, that we need to teach them how to play, but it wasn't around teaching them how to play. But what was very interesting was a few months down the road, I turned up in the classroom and the teacher said to me, oh, I'm sorry, but his play partner is not here today. We're likely to have some kind of emotional reaction to that because he likes to play with this little boy and he can't play by himself. Well, this was a few months down the road. We'd really worked on attachment, on creating safety. Next thing we knew, it was playtime, and off he was in the corner. I remember him playing with a little barn and with little farm animals. I just looked at the teacher and I said, good for you. Good for you. Look at what you've done for this little boy. You've allowed him the space to start to become himself. But if you didn't, other people would say, well, what's wrong with it? He likes to play with other children. He's socializing, and socializing is important. But being able to play alone is truly a sign of this emergent self that's coming out. So some of these children, when we say they don't know how to play, it's not about not knowing how to play, because by the way, play is another instinct and it's right deep in our brain, right beside attachment instincts. Playing is not something you have to learn how to do, but you have to have the space to be able to do it. And that's what we saw with this boy. I was so thrilled.
Space, and you said earlier, Eva, I just want to say it again, the attachment, the sense of safety. When a child is worried about who is taking care of me or what's happening around them, and they don't feel safe, they can't play. So this was a remarkable story. Thank you. Shall I go on?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, counter will in the classroom. What happens when the whole class becomes resistant and a teacher experiences the loss of being in the lead? And more force, more demanding compliance or something like this will lead to more counter will. So this is a dilemma. We've all been there. We've all faced it. If we push their buttons by what they perceive as coercion, which is us just trying to take back the lead, they will continue to push our buttons by not. There can be lots of counter will going on. When the coercion is greater than their attachment instinct, the counter will, where they are desiring to be good for us, counter will prevail. So we have some suggestions about this situation. Did you have more you wanted to say about this, Eva?
No, the only thought that comes to my mind again would this will very often happen when there have been changes in the people that are providing care for the children. Like we as you know, when we're organizing things, we tend to say, well, good, I've found an adult to replace the teacher or the caregiver. I found an adult to do that. But sometimes it's 2-3 substitute teachers that will come in, and then the third substitute teacher says, I can't manage this group. Well, again, the counter will is coming because too many strangers, too many people that I'm not attached to, too many disruptions, too many things that have caused that disruption to happen. It can also be with someone that they are attached to when there have been disruptions for a variety of things. So we have to again understand that it is an interaction or a dynamic that is happening, which more coercion, being stricter, isn't necessarily going to solve the circumstance in the way that we would like it to be solved. I mean, sometimes you can quieten them down with a very loud voice, but that's not going to solve the problem.
No, and I can think of another instance that I encountered all the time, which was at a lunch table where they were gathered as peers, and there was, everybody was eating, and there was what we call peer orientation. So if somebody started doing something goofy, the rest would all follow, and so on. This can feel like the teacher has lost their lead. So how does one get through these situations and keep their attention and focus on the adults who are caring for them? I actually told them stories mainly about my lunch and who grew the this and that seemed to work pretty well.
So one of the things we need to understand is about ourselves, because when a child or children are actively resisting being cared for by us, resistant to our natural leadership role that we want to have, because we know what's in their best interest, and it kind of comes and gets our own counter will, so they say, no, I won't, and part of us goes, yes, you will. Oops, we now end up in these big instincts fighting against each other. And I think most of you will agree that ultimately a child can usually hang in there a little longer than we can. And we don't like what it brings out in us. And so we don't feel comfortable with what might be going through, kind of what we want to do next. So how do you get out of that impasse? How do you get out of that moment in which neither one is going to win, which is what we call a power struggle, while at the same time retaining what is essential for children is that the adult needs to always be the one who's in the lead. Like, how do you do that? And again, working with schools and with slightly older children who can actually be even quite unpleasant for a teacher. Teachers have helped me understand. They say, Eva, if this child doesn't listen to me, I can't be their teacher. Oh my goodness, you're absolutely right. But I said, if you keep arguing with them, what's going to happen? And the teacher said, well, usually there's a meltdown and then there's a big catastrophe and it's a crisis and it's a disaster. And I said, do you feel as if that's the right thing to do? Well, no, because when I lose my temper like that, it doesn't help. The other children start having all sorts of problems. And so over the years, I finally came to the idea of how can we as the adults stay in charge even though we can't be in control. And I do have another story here of a little girl who came into one of our program classrooms for children with severe behavior disorders. Someone had made a mistake and had required that she sit for 1 minute before she could play with the toys. This was a very immature, very, very distressed little girl. A minute felt like a year to her. All she wanted to do was to play with the toys. And luckily there were no other children at that moment, so this one could play out. So I said to the teacher, I said, do you want her to have a meltdown? And the teacher said, no, we're not ready for that yet because she doesn't know me well enough. I said, well, then you need to give her the toys. This is the psychologist and the teacher. She rolled her eyes at me and she said, well, if I let her play with the toys, then she's going to be the one in the lead. I said, well, then, okay, then go ahead and insist and we'll just have to deal with the meltdown. The teacher sighed, walked over, picked up the toys, walked back, sat down, looked at the little girl with a lot of compassion and said, I have decided that you may play with the toys now. It was one of the most beautiful examples I had of staying in charge without being in control. And it was so interesting because the minute that happened, that little girl just calmed right down. And it wasn't just because she got the toys, because she had an adult who cared for her. So I encourage teachers and I encourage the rest of you to find ways in which you can continue to stay in charge, because you're absolutely right. And our next slide will speak to this. Even when you can't make the child do what at that moment you would wish they would do, but how can you keep staying in charge?
Yes, and I have an example of that as well, because it is a very difficult and tricky situation to be in with a child. We have so many instincts that are firing on both sides. This child should be doing as I ask. What am I going to do? How am I going to get everybody back in control? So I remember the day that the children decided to start, one child started running around the classroom because he wasn't engaged in anything. And of course, 5 or 6 others started to follow him. And so I began to run as well. Only I was running and singing a song, actually from the Disney movie Alice in Wonderland, inward, outward, backward, forward, come and join the race. And so I had a little singing song about racing around that came to me. And then I made the racing interesting, back and forth. And then I brought the speed down and down and down. And then I said, all done. And we were. And that was that. And this is the I was in charge. I knew I would get in charge if I just joined them and then took it to where it needed to go.
Exactly. Very different from saying, okay, well then run if you have to. Right?
Different than that, and different than saying,
stop
trying
it.
to get them to stop.
Yeah. But because teachers are those adults who are involved with caring for children know that if they say, well, do whatever you want, that is not a healthy situation for children. So how do you do that? And so we need to be aware of that, but it's tricky. It's not easy to think on your feet.
No, and these are all, I have to say that there's a lot in this presentation to be digested. And I hope that you will come to a Q&A if you have questions, or type in questions, or just watch it again if you have the time. But there's there's no recipe for any of this. It's all sort of having heard stories and heard examples, what pops into your mind, given that you now maybe will be looking at counterwill differently, because what pops into your mind is probably going to work. So we've talked about teachers losing the lead in so many ways that can happen, and getting into a power struggle. But it's important to note, as Eva has, that the children who witness this kind of the shift in right relationship, and the adult is no longer in charge, they feel alarm and they feel anxiety. So this can be an alarming and an anxiety producing situation. I had a second grade teacher who had no control of the class. And I think the whole year I was miserable, just sitting, hoping to survive it. Because to feel safe, children need the adults to be in charge. And the best way to regain the lead is through warmth. Remember way back a few sessions ago, we had the story of the north wind and the sun trying to get a traveler to take his cloak off, and the wind blew harder and harder, and that cloak went around closer and closer. They were in a contest, but then the sun came out and he removed his cloak. And it is true that if we can have a bit of fun, bring warmth to the situation, keep calm, that the counter will that is activated in both the children and probably the teacher as well, because we want to be the caring alpha. We want our role to be respected. We want the children in our care to feel safe. But if we bring warmth into the situation, that is very effective in bringing the children back into relationship with us.
Yeah. And again, that's what that teacher showed me so clearly. She, with warmth in her, she said, I have decided that you may play, I will let you play with the toys now. She just, with great warmth. It was amazing to see the transformation in that child. That was what she needed at that moment.
Yes, and we all wish that every moment in our room was just like this, with the children falling into lockstep behind us. It is that, that is also an instinct to imitate an adult. So we have that on our side. Yeah. So we've put together some phrases that perhaps would be a way to stay in charge, like the teacher who said, "I have decided," rather than to coerce. And in this situation, this child, I knew he wanted to finish his grapes, but it was the end of the meal. He was frustrated. We needed to clean up. And yet he wasn't quite done. And so he was saying no. So I sat with him and I switched from I to we to, and I would say, "We can do this. We can get your grapes. You're too tired right now. And I was thinking you needed more time." And just sat with him, and he finished. Now, this is a luxurious situation. We always don't have this. But the idea here is to find some words where it becomes your idea. I had a colleague, Katie, who took this, and this is Dr. Neufeld's inspiration. He says, make it your idea when you encounter counterwill from a child. And she was just a master of it. "Oh, I was thinking you needed that right now. I was thinking you'd want to put on your coat by yourself." She used the "I was thinking" card over and over again. The children never caught on. They were perfectly delighted. She was in the lead. She'd just been thinking exactly what they were doing. Wow, how remarkable is this? Oh, somebody really gets me.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah.
And for the child, but for the other children as well, because if we backtrack a little bit, it might well be that the child is saying, no, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to, I don't want to stop, or no, I'm not doing that. And then the adult who, again, sensitive to the fact they need to be in the lead, all the other children are saying, okay, who's going to be ruling the roost here?
Mhm.
So when you come back with, oh, I was thinking you might need a bit more time with the blocks. Now the children are saying, okay, the adult's in charge, might not agree, and can I have more time with the blocks too, or whatever? But it brings you back into that right relationship. You're the one, and that's what because the other children are looking to see, oh, okay, the adult decided. And it's amazing how that just again calms them down. But these are things we have to practice. These are not things. These are things that you might we actually have to retrain ourselves. This is where our prefrontal cortex, our integrative brain, has to, because we're going through the back door. We are allowing a child to do something we don't really want them to do, but we're doing it in a way that doesn't cause more problems and that reassures the other children. So it's a little bit of a roundabout way of getting to where we want to go, but ultimately it takes a whole lot less more time than if we started to insist and et cetera, and you all know where that can lead.
Yes, it's sort of that coercion would be experienced, no matter how it was put, as harshness by a child, and the getting back in control through the back door is not. It's warm. It has a warmth to it.
Yeah.
So we are welcoming counterwill, and we can just watch it melt away and dissipate as we open the door for it in our experience of children. So this is also an interesting idea of how counterwill is a protective instinct. When a child's alarm is elevated, maybe they have come from a home situation. They don't know who they can trust, and they push us away even though we are worthy of their trust. And I was reminded of a little girl in our care who was coming back to school, repeating in the same room, because she'd been a bit young the first year, and then she just wasn't ready to go on to the older toddler room. So she was coming back to the same room, but with a completely different group of teachers, because we moved with the children. And her home situation was a little bit upsetting, in that there was a birth of a sibling, and that sibling needed medical care, and the parents were rushing off to the hospital. There was a lot of disruption, and she was being left with people quite a bit. So she came in, and even though there'd been a home visit, and she and her new primary caregiver had met, and there'd been matchmaking and all of this, when her mom left in the morning, and this went on for some weeks, this little Anna would just sit by the gate through which her mom had left and plant herself, much in the posture of this little girl with her back towards us. And her primary caregiver was full of caring, alpha concern, and the little girl was pushing her away, could not accept it, could not receive care. So here we have this situation of the alpha caring adult and the child not being able to receive. And my colleague was devastated. She felt like a failure. Her heart was full of love. She didn't know why she couldn't get close to this little girl. But when we consulted with someone, and they actually just said the magic words, the child cannot receive care. Okay, so we needed a different strategy. And then we used this strategy over and over again when we were faced with a child who couldn't receive our care, which was Katie just began to stay close. She didn't She didn't interact. She didn't push herself on the child. She didn't offer anything, but she stayed close. She sat near her. And pretty soon, Anna
Yeah.
moved into her lap.
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, just being there. And I did that myself with children who are having difficulty. It's one of the strategies I learned when children absolutely couldn't receive care. And, their bodies, they cannot, there's nothing soft.
Yeah. And we have to, it's really about reading those signs, reading the signs the child is telling us, and recognizing that underneath that no, which is right there very clear, is a frightened little child, is a child whose alarm is huge. And the other thing we need to remember is that the reaction, that no reaction, is instinctive. I have a story, and I could tell you many stories about this little fellow, because again, he ended up in our class for children with behavior problems and came from, again, a very challenging home situation. I called him Mr. Counterwill because I think it was one of the time, it was early in the days when I had just encountered Dr. Neufeld, and so became aware of Counterwill, and he was constantly saying no. He being very oppositional. Um, and again, we were challenged with how to deal with it. But the saddest time I heard about it was when the teacher was preparing cookie dough and felt that it was healthy, okay for the children to eat the raw cookie dough. I'm sure she just had a little, things in there that were okay for them to do. And she gave them wooden popsicle sticks. From the goodness of her heart, she wanted to prevent the children from breaking the popsicle sticks and hurting themselves. And so she did what all of us would do. She said to the children, now, don't break the popsicle stick. And when she told me the story, she said, as soon as I said that, this little guy, Kevin, let's call him, looked at me, Eva, and took the popsicle stick and broke it. And she said, well, I had to do something because I had just told, and so they moved him away or whatever. But I thought to myself, this poor boy, he probably didn't even know he was going to break the popsicle stick, because just that don't break it caused his counter will to come up, because he's got so much counter will in him, and it just happened spontaneously. And I can even imagine him looking at the two pieces of, how did that happen? Like, he didn't even know. He had many, many reasons to have counter will in him. But when we started to see it differently, when we saw that he wasn't being oppositional, he was just overwhelmed by a world that wasn't working for him, then we could find different ways of helping him. But it's a challenge. It was not easy. But we have to remember how spontaneous it is, especially for the little ones. Yeah.
Yes, because there's a perfect example of the untemperedness of that age group. And there was nothing holding him back. As soon as that counter will came up, he acted.
Yeah. Even though he was going to lose stuff that he loved.
Yeah. So what we're suggesting here is that we slide away from counter will. We find back doors into it. We manage our own, instinct rising up to be caring, to be in charge, or to be in control. And instead think about engaging attachment instincts and in keeping that right relationship in order to reduce resistance. And they will mature out of this. We will find workarounds for these situations, and it is possible to stay in charge, make things your idea, and give space for this relationship and trust to develop.
Yeah.
And one of the best ways I know, we've mentioned music, we haven't mentioned fun, but honestly, fun is a great antidote to counter will. Not making fun of or imitating in a way that would hurt somebody's feeling, but just reducing resistance by adding in a bit of fun, because children are hardwired to play. So on the right, we have an example of, we need to clean the cubbies. And I made classroom work a great part of the curriculum, but cleaning the cubbies was meant to be fun. It was a fun activity. We had a song for sweeping, and we looked at everything that was in the cubbies, and it was a great way to spend time. The other picture on the left, it's still nap time in the room. The curtains are down, and the children want to be in there playing because it was most of the room. Oh, finding ways to do nap, how hard that is. Anyway, a lot of them were awake, but some were still asleep. So we began scrubbing the furniture. I turned the table upside down. I did it frequently, because they're so amazed at an upside down table because who's ever seen one? And there is a lot of stuff from food on there and so on. And so here they are all scrubbing away on their stools. I'm sure I'm singing.
Yeah. And they're not noticing that they can't go and play yet, right? Because there's a big no there. The big no is, no, you cannot go and play with the toys yet.
We have to be quiet, quiet. And none of that works. So singing a little song didn't disturb the sleepers, and it kept them engaged and actually quiet. Yeah, and scrubbing. Oh, I was going to talk about getting to the potty.
Yeah.
Someone just told me a story at a gathering recently where their son would come home from school every day with wet pants. And I must say, I didn't understand how that could happen. But anyway, it reminded me of what we did. We had, of course, times to go to the bathroom. And so this little girl was just learning how to go to the potty and not be in diapers anymore. And she didn't want to go after lunch. So I did two things. I had a transition song, which was "It's Potty Time for Gail Now," and it goes on and on. But anyway, and then she would sometimes go to the other side of the room, even with that. So then I began singing another fun song about potty waddy doodle, and boy, she just ran into that bathroom. She loved it. And we'd be dancing, we'd do a little dance and we made it fun. And for me, this was fun. For me, it wasn't just about fun for her, but I loved it. And everything was easier because of it.
Yeah. And that reminds me of another story. Again, a little boy, toileting had become a huge issue for him and the lovely woman who worked with him. He wouldn't even go into the bathroom except she didn't talk about the toilet, didn't talk about it at all, but filled the sink full of bubbles, and he got to play with his dinosaurs. And that went on for a week or 2 weeks, but never mentioned the toilet. But she at least got him into the bathroom by making it fun. And his mother would say, well, when are you going to teach him the toilet? When are you going to? No, we're not ready yet. We're just having fun. Yeah. Just having fun.
Yeah, exactly. It is the blessing, not to lose control or being in charge by being too silly, but just a little bit. So this is the same idea that being playful allows a way back into relationship because the children can't resist it. Well, you have to read the situation. You don't want to be funny when there's too much emotion, sad emotion going on that wipes it out. But when it's counter will resistance, that is often very responsive to a bit of fun. And so finding our way back, melting resistance without losing face. We don't want to lose face. And we don't want the child to lose face. We want everybody to come out of this intact. And we just are asking that you don't give into this idea that children learn that they don't have to follow our direction. Really, they're too much in the moment. They will learn that they don't have to follow our direction if we can't bring them into relationship. And that is an alarming state to be in for the child when they can't count on the adult to be in charge. So trust that they want us to be in charge, and we just have to find a path that works to get them there. Increasing connection increases their instinct to follow. Following us should be natural, not coerced, not pushed. Yeah, and here we're doing a little. I needed them to come someplace, so I sang this little song. Come, my kittens, come with me. Let's catch every mouse we see. And then, Mousy, run, we will catch you, you're the one. Oh, they'll go anywhere if I'm leading that, and they'll come with me. They love it. So anything I sing that anybody wants to learn, just let me know. I'm happy to share. And I believe this is our last slide of this content. We know that when a child is told that they're wrong or that they have engaged in a power struggle or they're not good or something like this, that they may experience themselves as failing if their counterwill is not well received. So as we begin to see things in a new light, as we learn to dance with this instinct, we are wired with counterwill. And as we normalize counterwill, and this is normal in children, and it's something to be celebrated when you think of the riches it provides for the children, their survival and their emergence. Crucial aspects. So we will welcome counterwill and learn how to dance with it very gently. Do you want to add anything to that, Eva?
You can't hear Eva. I think she's muted.
Sorry, yeah, seeing, yes, honoring this instinct in our children, I think is really, really important. Working with it, dancing gently with it. It's not easy to do, but it bears great fruit for the children in our care. Yeah.
And we always give you some key phrases and concepts from the session. Counterwill ensures survival and growth. Collect before you direct. We are wired with counterwill and should be. This is natural. This is something to be embraced. Learn to dance with counterwill. And we manage counterwill by staying in charge rather than being in control. And I think it's really important that change will happen. Trust the process. Maturation happens, and they'll get to the other side of managing their counterwill instincts with our support in a more mature fashion. And with that, I'm going to stop the share.
Yes, and ask Cheryl to join us. Yeah.
Hello. Well, I really like your singing. So this is useful, and more people should use that, because it's very effective in helping children follow, rules without knowing it.
Exactly.
Yeah, so, they're just doing a fun game, and, when I think about in Algonquin, we say domino for play, but it also means when you frolic around and you're having fun. And when you talked about letting nature take its course, this has been the First Nations way from the beginning of time. And you talk about, state natural facts and be direct. This is our people. And it seems that, it is a form of play, but, when you're teaching a child, when you got to do work yourself, like back in the old days, we needed to hunt moose to survive, but we had to have the time to do the work. So, this is why, Tokanagan was made, or, sacks to hold your baby on you so that you can perform the cleaning of the skin and, tanning hide and cutting the moose meat up. And then, as the child grew older and they were out of Tokanagan, and Tokanagan is where they carry the child on the back, they were able to walk around and start participating. And older siblings was usually the case, would go with them to draw water, to put the hides inside the pail of water and scrub it a little bit, or they had little chores, and it was not work.
Mhm.
So I think that and this is I've seen this at a camp. Like, I went camping with my daughter because she was in school in town, but not on the reserve. And there was a few First Nations children at that camp, and they started to play, when we got to the camp, the winter camp, they wanted us to make like a quinzee, they called it.
Mhm.
So much like an igloo. And everybody takes a shovel, and you got to shovel a ton of snow to actually make an igloo, and you make your little fort inside there, and you go in. But after that, they had another game where everybody sat around a fire, and they passed the ball, and they passed the ball to the next person. But you have to do a movement first. So if I went, and then I passed the ball and I gave it to Lena, and Lena would have to go. But she would do my movement first.
Fun.
Yeah.
Well, and when you have like 15, 20 children, this is a long game. And what happened is the First Nations children were like, why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this? I'm back to making the quinzee.
Yeah.
I was doing something that had meaning.
Mhm.
So this is, how we grew up.
Yeah.
And I think that, this is something that puts us like aside from, non-First Nations people.
Mhm.
And I was also thinking about, when a child is hungry or thirsty or they're tired, then this has an effect on how they're going to be. Their counter will.
Yeah.
I'm going to be defiant if I'm hungry.
Yeah.
I might be a little bit angry. Better feed me by 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I think that, the 0 to 5 brain is impacted by the environment. What kind of environment it is. The 0 to 5, the brain growth the brain is open, it's accepting, it wants everything. But as they grow older, it starts to close. And I think this being so wide open, it's like they need a time where, it's going to be a quiet time. And my last one is a question, what would you propose for a child who holds so much power? When the parent is giving the child everything that they want, and you have this child who holds a lot of power, like, what would you recommend for this child, or, how to, work with that child?
The irony of it is that, because you're right, there are some parents who find it very hard to say no. And therefore they do the, okay, do whatever you want. But actually those children are very anxious. They look controlling because that just makes life easier, but they're also very anxious underneath. So it's going to be hard work, but we need to also see the scared little child. Because imagine if you're 6 years old and your parents let you do whatever you want, how scary that is. But so we have to work with it. It's everything that we've talked about is exactly what we need to do. But it's hard because this child hasn't experienced, and this is another one of our sessions that we did, hasn't experienced the sadness of not being able to get everything that they want. So with a child like that, we're also working towards having them finally have their tears about the fact that, at least at the center, we are saying some no's. We are putting some limits. Yeah. But again, that's why we have 8 sessions where we've walked through all around. There's no one of our sessions that's going to have all the answers. We're giving pieces of the answers. And so, but every time it's about connection, about recognizing the child is trying to give us a message, about staying in the lead, and about bringing them to their sadness and tears. I don't know, Lena, if you want to.
No, I think that's beautiful, Eva.
Yeah.
And like sometimes, in the classroom, like when you look at the ratio for Quebec, it's 1-8, and it's kind of difficult to have that one-on-one time with, one child that really needs it. And sometimes we require more help.
Yes.
And it all depends on, the day sometimes, or depends on the ability of the children or the special needs of the children.
Yeah.
So I think that, these are things that we have to take into account, that it's not always possible.
Because again, I work in schools and I work in some circumstances, but what I've always said to the adults is, at the end of the day, at the end of whatever, is remember that it's our responsibility to let the child know we'll try again tomorrow. Right? So no matter how badly it's done, and that's where we talk the bridging, we'll see you again tomorrow, or when they come the next day. One of the principals at a wonderful school that has used Dr. Neufield's approach, he said what they now say to the children when they come in the morning is not "how are you?" They say, "I'm so happy to see you." Mm-hmm. And that's all. Children don't want perfection from us. They want to know, do you still want to take care of me? And so yes, obviously for some children, they've got so much distress, so many things going on. We need to try and move heaven and earth to get some more hands in there to take care of them. But if we just remember that they want to know that big question we have, who's taking care of me? Do you still want to take care of me? And if we can keep giving that message, bit by bit, things will find a way of working their way through.
Yes, and also it comes to mind for me, Eva, besides the trying to be the answer to the child as best we can, is that there's almost there's an effect when one is taking care of a child, listening to a child, making time for one child. It has a ripple effect with the whole class. Our attitude and what we're doing can have a ripple effect. It doesn't always work, but it also, don't underestimate the power of our relationship with one child bringing a result to all the children, because they go, oh, if that were me, that's how I would be treated. Yeah, they see how we treat them. So I know that's not an answer. Understaffing is a huge problem. It's just huge. It's been this way forever in the US. Yeah, it's not good. So, but we do what we can. We do what we do, and we show up every day. And this is very, very special work that is undervalued.
I like that. Show up. Just show up.
Yeah.
Show up and keep trying. Yeah.
We'll figure it out. It's okay. We'll get through this. Yeah. Now, I don't know if some of the participants have some questions. The recording is still on, but we could stop the recording at this moment, and then just have you come up if you have questions or comments that you want.
Yeah, how about we stop the recording and say, everybody turn on your cameras. I love seeing them.
There you go.